Okay, in the context of this festival, which is about the urban, right? Here in this film, I mean, we've just watched a film which dwells on the idea of home, right? This idea of home, but at the same time, I see that in the film, you don't really kind of look at, one doesn't see the city, right? You kind of go within. Tell me, is the idea of home divorced from the idea of a city? I mean, can one belong to one and not belong to the other? I mean, is it necessary that they need to cohabit? I mean, because one doesn't, you don't make any direct visual reference to the city.
Except for
the right, but that is in the beginning part of the film.
The rooftop shots.
Right.
It's a question I've thought about and then not thought about, because I think for me the experience of living has always been in cities. Like I lived in 3 cities and it's always been a very urban experience. So I actually feel very happy when I see some concrete. You know, I feel like it's the texture I relate to actually very much, and I've used it in a lot of films, and you know, and like the Syntex water tanks and dish antennas. I mean, that's all part of my visual landscape of what even I think of home, because that for me gets related to what I think of home as being in India and in an Indian city. So I think, but apart from that, I think what is inside the home is definitely more significant. And you see a lot of shots looking out through the window. And somehow that for me is very significant, what I'm going to see outside a window. And which, being in cities, I mean, it's not, I think I would feel quite strange if I only saw mountains or a sea. But if I saw coconut trees along with a building, I think I would feel quite happy. So I think the answer is yes. Yeah.
And then in this film, there are 2 streams in the narrative, right? There is Zui's story, which is very, I mean, the way you treat it is, it's very in the moment. Though it's nostalgic, it's very much in the moment. And then there is your story, which kind of ruminates on our past. It's on. Is it on? Oh, is it on? You keep it closer. Here? Yeah. Now is that better? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So in the two streams that you have, so then there is a second stream, which is your story, in which you ruminate on a past. How much of the personal comes into your storytelling? Right? I mean, while Zoe's story is playful and there is a home video kind of a feel to it, a very very beautifully shot home video. While your story, I feel, is has been by the end of it in the Janmashtami sequence, where you kind of just let go and kind of get into the moment. But otherwise, one sees that the past is looked at within a box, right? Within a frame. So tell me, I mean, how much of the personal comes into your storytelling? I mean, should one see this film as, as your past and your present continuous?
So initially, I was not going to use any characters or go into anybody else's home when I first had this idea. And some of that 16mm footage you see is something I shot like 6 years ago on a film camera. And then it kind of was just sitting there. But then also what happens is when you decide to make a film and then also, who's funding it and where, the constraints of that also come within it. So, I had like 10 months to finish this film with BSPT. And as I started putting it together, I felt that maybe just to have my personal story would be inadequate. And I was also scared it might get boring. I mean, how long can you sustain for 26 minutes just a collage of images? Like, can you sustain that? And I wasn't very sure if that would work. But while I was having those thoughts, I met a lot of different people told me, you must meet Kirtana and her house. And I didn't know who Kirtana was, and I kept thinking this was some ancestral house that she had. And then I realized that it was actually Konarak's ancestral house, and that too not an ancestral house in the typical sense. There have actually been tenants in that house for 80 years. So then when I met Zui, more than Kirtana and Konarak, I felt like at some level I felt Zui was like a mirror of what I had experienced in my homes. The kind of just affinity she had with the terrace and the tree and memories of the people who lived in that lane. So what I felt is, at one level, I was reminiscing about what was not there. Some of the homes in Delhi are not even there, but I'm standing on the building, but it's a different building, and capturing the scenery. That Zui has not yet left the house. She's going to leave the house. So I felt, and she's also going to the US where I had gone, and I kept remembering certain things about the light and the quality of the light and the windows. So just meeting Zui and talking to her, I felt that perhaps she's also going to think of similar things. So that's why I then decided to tell the story through Zoe. So.
Yeah, because I remember, when we had met maybe a year ago, I don't think you had filmed. Sorry, you hadn't started filming, I guess, but you were looking at the idea of spaces, right? So as a filmmaker now, how far away or how close do you kind of stay with the original idea? What did you, is the film what you had imagined?
No. Some elements of it, but actually this is probably there's not much of me speaking in the film, but you wouldn't believe it, this is the 12th draft of what has been written, because I wrote a lot. And then suddenly all of that was not at all working in the kind of film, because the visual material that came out of Kirtana and Konarak's house was so different in flavor to the way my writing was. And then I felt that there's no way that the two would be able to gel. So the writing actually came out of something based on what they are doing. And again, it's very different. Probably looking at this, it wouldn't seem that there is a connection, but for me, it actually came down to something very simple, but it's almost like, you had to go till very far away and travel and come back to bring it down to this much. So it has changed, and I think that's what is about the process of filmmaking, that things change, but you have to keep on questioning, why are you making this film? And I think I did that, so that even then it's not just about characters, but at several points people even told me that maybe you should just have it as a story about them, but then it would become a story about them, and I really needed to have my voice in it. So for me, the challenge was how to integrate the two stories, how to make them work. And that was the editing challenge. Like many versions of the edit was to make them work. And I think it finally happens when that Janmashtami sequence, I'm able to gel the two together.
I guess maybe the audience will have questions, especially about the editing, which I thoroughly enjoyed.
Check. Observation, but did you try watching the film without the music in it, and did it have the same kind of effect that it did at the 12th draft? Second question is at some point when he's playing the last song, there's a dog howling. Was that diegetic, non-diegetic? Was it consciously put there, or did you think that there was a creative treatment to enhance?
The dog was in the room, so it was more like you can't take that out, it's part of the music. Yeah, of course, except for the last part where he's playing, wherever else there's music, I've put it. There are lots of sections where you hear music, which is what I've culled out, or where he's just even practicing, and he's not playing for us or performing for us, but we just kept recording, and so it was very nice to be able to use just his guitar music, even in sections where the story is not about him.
Was it a conscious decision? Were you aware that there was not much of the classical guitar music in shots where perhaps that showed Delhi, as much as compared to the ones that you...
So I didn't know that there was going to be this kind of music till we shot with him, and we did shoot with them before I shot Delhi. But that music did not belong to Delhi. That for me is very connected with them. So I was able to use it in the 16mm footage, the more poetic part of the film. I was able to use this music. But in the other sections, I think because my memory of that space is only through the memory of the sparrows and the birds of that colony, and not with the music. Questions?
Right, then since no one is at it, how did you decide, continuing from the point of where the lady asked you, how much did you decide of what you want to show of your personal, say, history, and how much did you decide to show with this other family? Was there a conscious decision on your part that these are the certain segments that I should reflect on, or how much of my personal history should I show in the film?
Can I ask you a question? I mean, why do you feel like it's a disproportion? Is it disproportionate or?
It's your film.
Okay.
It works.
No, so for me, it's actually like how you answered in the morning. It's a very intuitive process when you start editing the film. So for me, the edit, I don't question it too much. Like I just follow it intuitively, what is happening. And I felt that at one point, what I realized after seeing the material was at one point I have to step back and it just becomes like their story has to carry it forward. So I felt like I was giving the context, and then it's tough to be very steeped in their story and then to come out because it's so different that it's like a real jerk. So I think it was quite intuitive, and that's how I did it.
Did you ever feel that that you needed this has to be a longer film? That you couldn't you haven't said everything that you wanted to say about your story. I mean, did you?
Yeah, I did feel that.
Right?
Yeah. But again, I mean, we had 26 minutes and you're constrained by that, and yeah.
And I also remember you saying about, you're also working on a film on hockey, right?
It's very dangerous. Sushma knows a lot about me.
No, so I recall you saying that it was very, that the hockey, this was a very difficult film to work on, right? I mean, was it the personal? I mean, I guess it was the personal that was the difficult.
I think my decision to put a voiceover made it very difficult. In my previous film, I've not used voiceover, I've used text. And there is something beautiful about the silence of text, and if you use text carefully and minimally. And I could have also done that with this film, but somehow I used it as a challenge to try and use the voiceover so that you could hear me, because it was a personal story. And I don't put myself in other films. So I found it very, very difficult, because every time I was listening to various versions of the voiceover, I was feeling it's not communicating what I wanted to communicate. So that process to feel satisfied, till the point I felt satisfied, took very long.
So it wasn't about talking about the personal. I mean, bringing the personal into the...
No, that was not difficult. It was just about... because maybe I don't write as much as a writer would, so I think to be able to put in words and have it work visually was tough. That's what I think, the combination of that was what was difficult.
Yesterday we saw Patricio's film Nostalgia Badale. So nostalgia versus memory, or is it nostalgia versus memory, or could this film have been nostalgia? Or is it memory?
No, it's definitely nostalgia also. But the nostalgia is there because of the memory. Like you remember certain elements and that's why you became nostalgic for it. Yeah? What are you asking?
No, because nostalgia seems to have some kind of a lament, some kind of...
No, so actually even at a screening in Delhi, there were some people who said that, but what do we do about this situation that homes go away? And I said, no, nothing. I think it's just if you are able to be aware of it and if you can address it. And for me, there was something very beautiful about like mosaic floors and light, and I felt it would lend itself well visually. So it wasn't really a sadness. It was more about, can we somehow portray these things before it's completely lost or whatever, or just even have them in a visual domain?
Any other questions?
What I appreciate there's a huge crowd here. So that's very good to see that for a film like this. Secondly, I like the way you said that as in this has been several rounds of iterations you have made in the script. So it's okay. It's very, and you have been very frank in saying that you have been very true to say that there have been changes, and still you were sticking to the what you had in your mind, because you were talking about the poetic visuals, which I also noticed in some of the things. One of them is like that cane chair, which is being merged with the with the cityscape. which was very nice to see the change in the visuals. And one quick question, as in, what will be your subject for the next movie?
It's a film on hockey. It's a film on hockey in Coorg. Yeah. Thanks. Deepa, you have?
Sorry, this is not a comment to your film, but it's just that this house that you chose, 58 St. Mark's Road, is a very, very special place for many of us. In the sense that, I just wished you had mentioned that Pattabhirama Reddy lived there and that Samskara was born there. I mean, it was like a salon. I mean, it's not about putting all this into your film, but I just feel there was such a small fraction of the present moment of just the three of them. And yet, this house in Bangalore and in, but I mean, so many things, whether it was the center of the theatre world, it was the center of even debates between Kannada and English journalists. It was, that's where George Fernandez hid during the emergency. It's a extraordinary space. So this is not to say you should put it into your film, but I just think because there's so many people here, I'd just like to add to what that house was, or whether it was Snehlatha Reddy's, even not even her prison diaries, but she wrote a play called Sita that was enacted in that space. It's also the place where she died, 3 weeks after getting parole from prison. So it's a space that for many people in the city was, when he says accommodative, in the largest possible sense, whether it was politics, whether it was other kinds of activities, cultural activities, whatever it is. So it's just not a comment again on the film, but I just feel that we should honor the spirit of 58 St. Mark's Road, because that's what we called it. Yeah. And it was definitely Pattabi and Snehlatha Reddy's home. Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that in, Deepa. I'm glad you brought that in. Yeah, Surabhi.
Just pass the mic, please. Yeah. Comment. I mean, I don't have. I'm not from Bangalore, though I live here, so I don't have that same relationship. But I was just thinking about how can one filmically think about memory without letting it get soaked in nostalgia and losing a sense of loss. And I think Deepa's comment made me understand what I was trying to figure out in your film, that the sense of loss becomes so personal within the film that that larger sense of what that space might have meant seems to get lost. So I always worry about overwhelming nostalgia. Though it's very poetic, very beautiful, it can really draw you in and you can connect with it, but it seems to cut out a larger world. It seems to become about that moment when that young girl, climbs up the steps, and as an audience you can feel that moment when she's crying, but it is much larger than that. Not to deny that there is that very personal, but I think that sense of nostalgia can overwhelm a larger sense or a larger meaning. And I think Deepa's comment suddenly brought to me what I felt was going into the background. So again, just a comment, but finally I had the words to to say what I wanted to say because of Deepa's comment about the deep history of this place.
So just to add, I'll just answer that briefly, is that I didn't know Kirtana before I met her for this film project. And as I found out more about the house and the history, there was even a point when I considered whether I should go ahead with this, because if you're from Bangalore, at one level it's so famous, like you know it and it's the space. And I was not sure if, I knew I would not be able to accommodate all of the history and the essence of, no, maybe history of the space. But for me it was definitely supposed to be about nostalgia for the childhood house. That's what the film was supposed to be. That's why Zoe, and because she was the only one who was born in this house. The others have come later. So that definitely was a conscious decision to just keep it about nostalgia, about childhood home, about leaving, and just the small memories that you have of a space. Thanks.
Your next film, Hockey, will be a short film?
It's a long film, yeah. It's more than 1 hour long. Yeah. Fiction? No, not fiction. Documentary. No, yeah.
Thank you, Sandhya and Sushma and everyone else. So we have a small 5-minute break. The next film is Gitanjali Rao's animated film, Printed Rainbow, after which Surbhi Sharma will be in conversation with Gitanjali. So thank you.